Hello, I'm Marc Sumner, host of the Channel Chat podcast show, and today I have the pleasure of Matt Reeve, CEO of Modern Networks, in the house. How are we doing, Matt?
I'm doing very well, thank you, Mark.
Good, thanks for coming in. Matt, I was interested to start with your background because a lot of the listeners have come onto the show and said to me, we don't have many people that have gone through acquisitions and you never seem to talk about that. So I thought you'd be an ideal guest to talk about that sort of path you took. But before we get to that, your career started off as an engineer. So take me back to the beginning. Why did you do that?
So going right back, after doing my GCSEs, I did, I think, 3 days of A-levels and then decided that, in actual fact, I wanted to earn some money. So I was an apprentice at a company called GEC Plessey Telecommunications, or GPT, in Beeston in Nottingham. So I did a 4-year apprenticeship and then they offered me an Astra company car and I moved to London from Nottingham and a massive salary of £11,000, I think it was at the time, and I came to the big smoke. And that's how I've ended up down south.
And you carried on your career. Take me up to date then. So you carried on your career before Modern Nexus. You were doing still engineering?
Absolutely. All the way through up until the point that, got the business a little bit larger. So once I was down in London, I left GPT, joined Kingston Communications, KCOM as it now is, which is where I got more heavily involved in computers and converged systems, got involved in Novell networking, bit of Unix, went back to GPT, which then got taken over by Siemens. Yeah. And that's where I got heavily involved in Cisco networking, and then left them and went contracting in, I think that was about 1998. Got a client, Ericsson, who I worked for, and they asked me to help one of their customers out, which was a company called Hillier Parker, which turned into CBRE, and they were my first customer.
So for those of the listeners that don't know about Modern Networks, can you give us a bit about your background of how you started it and what Modern Networks actually does?
Yeah, I never got up one morning and decided to create a business. It was a customer's need because engineers help people and solve problems. So this customer, Hillier Parker, had got taken over by CBRE. They wanted to move to IP. They got a very traditional network, and the IT director at the time wanted somebody to look after their voice and data networks. They got an internal IT team. After the takeover, he didn't want to recruit anybody, wanted an outsourced service. So I very hurriedly created a company, and we provided them an outsourced service. I employed my first employee almost straight away.
Did you have money then? Did you have money to do that sort of stuff? Because
it was self-financing. Self-financing. So, it's the beauty of managed services before they were called managed services. Bear in mind, this is the year 2000. So we agreed a monthly fee, and that paid for me and the engineer. So myself and a chap called Phil.
And talk me through those first early years. How did it suddenly grow? Because at that point in your career, you're the operator, you're doing the work.
Absolutely, yeah. Certainly probably for the first 5 years, solidly being an engineer, doing the work, resolving the incidents across TDM telecoms, Cisco networking, checkpoint firewalls, bit of Unix, and thoroughly enjoying myself with me and Phil. We were learning all the time, and this was the time when people very first started working from home. So NT4, I can't think it was called, whatever, it turned into remote desktop terminal services, and I was driving around to directors' houses, setting them up so that they could work from home. And you think that's 17 years ago now.
And the irony now of what's happened in the pandemic, so that there was lots of people in the pandemic, MDs at home who couldn't even turn on their laptop, let alone set up the desktop or anything there. So
yeah, I think IT kept the global economy going.
Absolutely.
In March of 2020, we very quickly obviously flipped our own business, but spent many months rolling out remote working and improving remote working for all our customers.
And Matt, when I looked at your background, and I've spoken to you before, and I look at James's background, you both come back from an engineering background. Has that helped or hindered the growth of the business? And what I mean by that is, I normally look at CEOs of businesses, and they've either come maybe from an operations background, or sometimes they've been a sales background, not normally engineering. So did that help with you in the early days? Because you're obviously trying to grow organically with it, but you've both come from a similar background.
We have. I think most small MSPs, they start off by being a single individual who gets some customers and supports them. I think the challenge is, if you've never done sales before, is from scratch growing a sales organisation. It's extremely difficult. It's extremely difficult when you're really small. It's extremely difficult when you're a bit bigger, and it's extremely difficult when you're big. You know, running sales it's a very difficult task. Obviously, as an engineer, previously I thought sales was dead easy, but I do have a story when I rang up probably the most interesting competitor of my first customers and asked if I could support their network, and they told me to go away in a less polite fashion. And I said to Phil, my first engineer, I said, this cold calling doesn't work, Phil, I'm not doing that again. So that was my first lesson in that sales is quite hard.
Would you call yourself a salesperson now, or how do you describe your role? Yes, we've got the CEO title, but how do you see yourself in the business?
I would absolutely describe myself as a salesperson, because the role of sales is to help people. So even if you're not technical, a salesperson should be listening to a customer's real business problems, working out how to fix the issue, replaying back to the customer what their issue is and what a suggested outcome should be to resolve their problem, and then going away back into the business, describing the customer's problem, and together with the team coming back with a solution. So being a salesperson, a successful salesperson, is not really much different from being an engineer.
Yeah, with the first few years, you obviously had challenges or some obstacles to overcome regarding getting more customers. What were the first few years like? How did you suddenly start getting that going and thinking, actually, I've got a real business here, I've actually got something?
I think the best time was when first customer merged in with another big organisation and had some huge changes, and it was quite clear that our engagement with them would change quite rapidly, and so I had to very quickly go and use my contact list to go and find some additional business, because I could see that the majority of our income, we had a very high customer concentration at that point in time, was at risk. So necessity is when you walk backs right up against the wall, that's when you really become a salesperson. And that's when I appreciated that, even bringing up the people that I knew really well, still converting that into revenue it's hard work, and like anything, it just requires consistency, and you just have to stick at it, discipline.